Have you ever heard of a woman who lost everything only to discover she was the heir to $250 million while she was sleeping in a broken minivan behind a gas station? What if I told you that somewhere in America tonight, over 2.5 million children will go to bed without a stable home, yet one mother, drowning in that same darkness, uncovered a family secret powerful enough to change hundreds of lives? And here's the twist no one sees coming. Before she could claim a single cent, her youngest son vanished, taken by the very man who once walked away from them. This isn't a fairy tale. It isn't a movie script. It's the kind of story that reminds us how fragile life can be, and how courage sometimes comes from the people who've been shattered the most. In the next 2 hours, we're going to walk beside Maya Thompson, a mother pushed past the edge of survival, through freezing nights in a 2003 Dodge Caravan, through the quiet kindness of strangers, through a storm of betrayal, and finally into a battle for truth that reshaped not just her future, but the future of countless families like hers. So buckle up, take a breath, and let yourself step into a journey that proves hope can hide in the darkest corners. Let's dive in. If you've ever had a season in life when everything seemed to fall apart in the same week, then you'll understand what happened to Maya Thompson. Except her collapse wasn't a week. It was a single day. A day that felt like the universe had quietly decided she'd endured enough, and then pushed her anyway. It began the morning she lost her job at the textile plant, the only stable income she had. The manager didn't even look her in the eye. He just slid a paper across the desk and said the company was restructuring. Behind that cold word were 183 workers suddenly jobless, including a single mother of two who already lived one paycheck behind the rent. She drove home with her hands trembling on the steering wheel, watching the gas gauge hover over empty, knowing the little money she had left would decide between fuel or food. But life wasn't done with her yet. When she reached the small apartment complex on Brookside Lane, a bright orange eviction notice was taped across her door like a warning sign. Past due, final action pending. The city didn't care that she'd been working doubles for months. They didn't care she had skipped meals, so her kids didn't have to. They didn't care that the medical bills from her daughter's asthma attack last winter were the final punch that knocked her finances flat. And in a way that only tragedy can, the world stayed quiet. Too quiet, as if daring her to crumble. Inside the apartment, the cupboards echoed with emptiness. Her son, Noah, ate the last packet of instant oatmeal without understanding it was the last thing they had. Her daughter, Lila, tried to help by offering to skip dinner. That was the moment Maya broke, not loudly, but in the way a soul bends under too much weight. And yet, what truly shattered her wasn't the money, the hunger, or the eviction. It was the realization that no matter how hard she tried, the world could still sweep her children into a storm before she even had time to shield them. Studies show that families living paycheck to paycheck are one unexpected bill away from homelessness, and over 40% of single mothers in America live with that fear every day. Maya became part of that statistic in less than 24 hours. But for her, this wasn't a number. It was the moment she saw her children packing their belongings into plastic grocery bags because there weren't enough boxes left from the last time they'd moved. Still, even in moments like that, life has a strange way of slowing down just long enough for you to hear your own thoughts. For Maya, that quiet, whispered one painful truth. This isn't rock bottom. This is the drop before it. She watched Lila carefully fold her worn school uniform. She watched Noah gather his handful of toys as if they were treasures that might keep them warm. And she realized she'd been living in survival mode for years, too busy hustling from shift to shift to notice how small their life had become. The lesson wasn't one she wanted, but it was one she needed. When everything collapses at once, the fall reveals what you can't afford to lose. As night came and the apartment darkened around them, the temperature dropped, and Maya faced a decision no parent should ever have to make. Sleep on the sidewalk outside their locked apartment, or sleep in their old minivan where at least the doors could close. She chose the van. She chose safety. She chose the little sliver of dignity still available. And while her children slept in the back, wrapped under thrift store blankets, Maya sat awake in the driver's seat, staring at the empty parking lot. She felt fear, yes, but also something else rising quietly beneath it, something she wouldn't recognize fully until much later. The first spark of the strength that would carry her through everything ahead. Because the truth is, no story of transformation begins with comfort. It begins here, with the collapse, the loss, the moment you think there is no path left. What Maya didn't know yet was that this night, this cold, humbling, heartbreaking night, was the doorway to something extraordinary. And the fall was only the beginning. Now, let's step into the moment where survival turns into something deeper. The moment hope finds its first breath, even when no one is looking. There's a certain silence that settles on a home the night before you lose it. Not the peaceful kind, the heavy kind, the kind that makes every sound sharper, every breath louder. That was the silence inside Maya's apartment on Brookside Lane. The sky outside had turned the color of old bruises, and the hallway lights flickered the way they always did when the building was tired of pretending it was still livable. But this time, Maya wasn't tired because of the peeling paint, or the broken heater, or the creaking pipes. She was tired because she knew it was her family's last night there, and she had nothing left to save it. She sat on the stained carpet with a pile of plastic grocery bags beside her, because plastic bags were the only luggage they had left. Cardboard boxes. She used the last ones during their eviction 2 years ago. Storage bins. She'd sold them at a yard sale to cover medication when Lila had an asthma flare-up. This time, all she had were thin bags that tore if you breathed on them wrong. It's funny how you can live somewhere for years and still pack your entire life in under an hour. A landlord survey once said the average American owns over 300,000 items. Maya had fewer than 300. She could count the things she owned by memory, not by room. And tonight she touched each one as if it held a goodbye. Noah gathered his toy fire trucks. Only 2 had wheels left, but he kept them because they made him feel brave. Lila packed her school folder and the hand-me-down sweater her teacher had quietly slipped her last winter. Maya folded exactly 4 shirts and 2 pairs of jeans, all she had left after selling clothes to cover rent. Every time she tied a plastic bag, it felt like tying the end of a chapter she didn't want to finish. The bags crackled and sighed under the weight of their life, and each sound seemed to echo, "This is all." But the moment that nearly broke her wasn't packing the bags. It was stumbling upon the old shoebox at the back of the closet, a box she had avoided for years. Inside were pieces of a life she barely recognized, a photo of her and her ex-husband back when they still smiled, a hospital wristband from the night Noah was born, Polaroids of birthdays they couldn't afford to celebrate later. She found a drawing Lila made years ago, stick figures holding hands under a crooked house with the words, "Mommy keeps us safe." Maya pressed the drawing to her chest as tears burned through her exhaustion. It was the kind of pain that didn't shout. It whispered, "Have I failed them?" That question is one too many American parents understand. In fact, nearly 35% of families facing eviction say their biggest fear isn't the loss of shelter. It's the moment they have to tell their children they're homeless. And for Maya, that moment came at midnight. Lila crawled into the living room, rubbing her eyes. "Mom, do we really have to leave tomorrow?" she asked, not angry, not whining, just hopeful that maybe somehow her mother could still fix it. Maya looked at her daughter's bravery and thought about how unfair it was that children learn about loss before they learn multiplication. So Maya lied, because sometimes love speaks in gentle lies. "We're going on a little adventure," she whispered, "just for a while." Lila nodded slowly, the way children do when they want to believe something, even when they don't understand it. She went back to the bedroom to help Noah zip his tiny backpack. And, while Maya watched them, two small silhouettes packing their worlds into shapes too small to hold their dreams, she learned her first lesson of the night. Sometimes the heaviest things you carry aren't the bags, but the memories of the life you're leaving behind. As dawn crept closer, exhaustion settled in her bones like frost. The apartment, once a place of noise and warmth, now looked like a hollow version of itself, bare walls, empty shelves, echoes where laughter used to live. And yet, in that fragile silence, something shifted. As Maya tied the final bag, she felt a strange clarity wash over her. She didn't know where they would sleep tomorrow. She didn't know how she'd feed her children. But she did know one thing. She was still standing. Broken, maybe, but standing. And sometimes that's enough to begin again. With the first light of morning brushing across the floor, Maya gathered the bags, took her children's hands, and stepped outside. The cold air hit her like a truth she had no choice but to face. Life would not wait until she was ready. She locked the door for the last time, but as she walked toward the old minivan waiting in the parking lot, she whispered a quiet promise to herself. This is not the end. Not for them. Not for me. And with that, their journey truly began. Because the moment you close the door on the life you knew, you open the door to the life you're about to fight for. Most people have memories tied to their cars, road trips, late-night drives, music turned up too loud. But for Maya, the 2003 Dodge Caravan wasn't a vehicle anymore. It was home. It was shelter. It was the last line between her children and the streets. When she pulled into the dimly lit parking lot behind a shuttered strip mall, she could feel the van sigh under the weight of everything it wasn't built for. 3 kids and 1 mother, trying to fit their entire life into a rust-spotted shell with a heater that only worked when it felt generous. Inside the van, the air smelled like old upholstery and cold air, sharp, metallic, unforgiving. The seats were stiff from age. The sliding door stuck every time she tried to open it, and the overhead light flickered like a dying star. She folded the second-row seats down, spreading out the blankets they'd kept from the apartment. Noah crawled into his little spot near the back window, where condensation had already begun to form from their breath. Lila arranged the bags to make a wall for privacy, pretending it was a fort. And baby Claire, only 18 months old, was restless, kicking her tiny feet against the car seat straps, her cheeks already chilled from the November air. What broke Maya's heart wasn't the cold. It was how normal her kids tried to make it feel. Kids have a way of turning survival into imagination, and for a moment, she let them. They played pretend. Noah declared the van a spaceship. Lila whispered that they were explorers hiding from space monsters. But even with all the imagination in the world, reality seeped in through the cracks. The windows fogged so thick they couldn't see outside. The temperature dipped into the 30s. A night like that wasn't an inconvenience, it was a threat. Statistics say nearly 1.3 million American children experience homelessness in a given year, and over 40% of them live in cars at some point. But numbers never show the part where a mother has to decide between turning on the engine for heat or saving the remaining quarter tank of gas so they can get to a safe place tomorrow. Maya started the engine twice that night, letting the heater push out waves of warm air that disappeared too quickly. Baby Claire fell asleep on her chest, and every minute Maya kept the heater on, she whispered silent apologies to the future version of herself, who would have to find a way to pay for gas she didn't yet have. There's a unique kind of vulnerability in sleeping in a car. The darkness outside becomes something you have to monitor, not fear. Every crunch of gravel, every passing shadow jerks your body awake. At midnight, the headlights of a security patrol swept across the van, and Maya tensed, ready to be asked to move, ready to pretend she was just resting. But the car rolled by without stopping. Relief washed over her, but so did shame. Not shame for being poor, not shame for being evicted, but shame that society had built so many walls and offered so few doors for people like her. At 2 a.m., baby Claire woke crying, her tiny body confused by the cold and the cramped space. Maya rocked her gently, humming a tune she remembered from her own mother. Lila offered her blanket, even though she was shivering herself, the kind of generosity that only children give without thinking. Meanwhile, Noah whispered, "Mom, will we be here tomorrow night too?" In that brave but scared voice only a 7-year-old can manage. She swallowed the truth. She wasn't sure. She only said, "I'm working on something better." And in that moment the van felt even smaller, like the walls were closing in with the weight of her promises. But somewhere in that long, cold night, Maya found another lesson written between fear and survival. A home isn't its walls. It's the people inside trying to hold each other together. The Dodge Caravan wasn't safe, warm, or private, but it held her children. It held the last pieces of her hope, and that had to be enough, at least for now. By dawn, frost coated the windows like ghostly fingerprints. Maya wiped a circle clear and saw the world outside waking up. People in clean clothes heading to work, kids with backpacks waiting for buses. All the things her children didn't have anymore. And yet, when baby Claire stirred and Noah stretched and Lila blinked awake, they looked at Maya like she was still their whole world, as if the van were nothing more than a temporary chapter, not their new reality. That morning, As they brushed their teeth at a gas station sink and warmed their hands under the air dryer, Maya realized survival comes in layers. Last night was about warmth. Today would be about food. Tomorrow, she didn't know yet, but she felt the beginning of a resolve she didn't know she still had. Because once you've watched your children sleep in a car, you stop dreaming about comfort and start fighting for change with a fire that can't be taught. And now, with their first night behind them, Maya must face what comes next, navigating a world not built to help families like hers, and discovering the unexpected places where small acts of kindness flicker like lights in the dark. It's strange how sometimes the people who save you aren't the ones you know, but the ones who simply appear. After 2 nights in the Dodge Caravan, Maya learned that kindness doesn't always come wrapped in perfection. It often comes in wrinkled uniforms, tired smiles, and voices that carry quiet compassion. The system didn't care that she had 3 children. It didn't care that shelters were full or that waiting lists stretched for months. But people, ordinary people, showed up in ways she never expected. And it began the morning she walked into the public library with the kids, their faces red from the cold, their shoes damp from dew on the pavement. Libraries are often the last refuge for people who have nowhere else to go. Warm, quiet, free. Maya didn't want to be noticed, but when the librarian, a woman with silver hair and soft eyes named Evelyn, saw them, she didn't see homeless family. She saw people. She saw tired children. She saw a mother trying her best. And, without asking questions, she brought over 3 steaming cups of hot water and a handful of tea bags. For warming up, she whispered, as if kindness needed to stay secret. She pointed them toward the children's section and pretended not to notice that Maya lingered by the heating vent a little too long. Later, when baby Claire began fussing, Evelyn quietly slipped a granola bar into Maya's hand. Just one, just enough. And while it wasn't a feast, it felt like abundance. In that moment, Maya realized how powerful small gestures could be. Studies show that nearly 70% of families in crisis survive their hardest days not because of large systems or government intervention, but because of acts of compassion from strangers who choose to see them. It's a reminder that empathy, when shared, becomes a lifeline. That afternoon, another stranger stepped into their story. The gas station attendant, a man in his 30s with oil-stained hands and a tired posture, noticed them filling a single dollar's worth of gas. Maybe he recognized the shame in Maya's eyes, or maybe he knew the feeling of stretching every cent. Whatever it was, he walked outside, tapped her shoulder gently and said, "Somebody left this behind yesterday. Want it?" He held out a plastic bag with a sandwich, chips, and a juice box. She knew he was lying, but she also knew he was trying to protect her dignity. Maya whispered, "Thank you," too quietly, but he heard it anyway. And then there was the church. Not the kind with grandeur or stained glass, just a small community church with a fading sign and a parking lot that felt safer than the rest. On their 3rd night in the van, as Maya rocked Claire to sleep, a soft knock on the window startled her. She braced herself for judgment, for pity, for someone telling her to leave. Instead, an older man in a security uniform offered a folded blanket and said, "We leave the side door open at night. Bathrooms, the first door on the right. Don't worry, nobody will bother you." He didn't ask her story. He didn't demand explanations. He just offered warmth. These encounters stitched together something Maya had lost long before eviction: faith, not in systems, not in charity, but in people, in strangers who saw her humanity before her struggles. And, with each act of kindness, no matter how small, she felt the faintest beginnings of hope stirring beneath the exhaustion. The lesson emerged slowly but clearly. When institutions fail, individuals often rise, and sometimes survival depends on the compassion of people who owe you nothing. But kindness also brought something unexpected: a sense of responsibility. If strangers could offer pieces of their hearts when she had nothing to give in return, then she owed it to her children to believe that better days were possible. She owed it to herself to keep pushing, and she owed it to each person who helped her to make sure their efforts weren't wasted. As the week unfolded, these everyday angels became the invisible net catching her before she hit rock bottom. They didn't fix everything, far from it. But they reminded her she wasn't invisible. They reminded her she wasn't alone. And most importantly, they reminded her that even in the darkest chapters, there are still sparks of light. Quiet, steady, human light. That light guided her toward what would happen next, a moment that would shake her, test her, and change the direction of her life forever. Because in this next chapter, Maya discovers just how quickly a fragile situation can crumble, and how, in the middle of crisis, one unexpected act can turn everything upside down. There are moments in life when the ground doesn't just shift, it drops. And for Maya, that moment arrived on a cold Thursday morning outside the community church, where she'd parked the Dodge Caravan to let the kids stretch their legs. The sky was a muted gray, the kind that feels like it's holding its breath. She was cleaning out the front seat, gathering crumpled receipts and snack wrappers, when she noticed a thick envelope wedged beneath the passenger mat. She thought it was junk mail at first, some forgotten bill or a charity flyer, but the embossed gold lettering stopped her. Morton and Callahan, attorneys at law. She didn't know the name. She didn't know the firm. But something about the weight of the envelope felt intentional, heavy in a way that didn't come from paper alone. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a letter printed on creamy ivory paper and sealed with an embossed crest she'd never seen before. The writing was formal, distant, yet strangely careful, as if someone had rehearsed the words for years before finally letting them go. "Dear Ms. Maya Thompson," it began, "we regret to inform you of the recent passing of Eleanor Harrington." The moment she read that name, her breath hitched. Harrington, her father's mother, a woman she had never met, a woman who had, according to her father's angry, hushed stories, wanted nothing to do with her or her mother. But then came the line that nearly made her knees buckle. "You have been named the primary beneficiary of the Harrington Family Trust, valued at approximately $250 million. Maya reread the sentence until the letters blurred. $250 million. It didn't feel real. She blinked, wondering if exhaustion was making her hallucinate. Yet the words stayed on the page, sharp and undeniable. She read further. "You must appear in person at our New York office within 15 days to complete identity verification and claim your inheritance. Failure to appear will result in forfeiture to secondary recipients." 15 days, and she didn't even have $15. She sank back into the driver's seat, the letter trembling in her hands. Claire babbled in the back. Noah asked if lunch was soon, and Lila traced foggy shapes on the window. They were unaware that their entire lives had just shifted. Maya felt a storm of emotions: shock, disbelief, anger, grief for a woman she never knew, and something close to hope that she was too afraid to touch. But then came guilt, a heavy, suffocating guilt. How could she think about millions when her children hadn't had a warm meal in 2 days? How could she believe in a miracle when her reality was one wrong turn away from losing them to the system? Still, she couldn't ignore the truth printed in clean black ink. This wasn't luck. This wasn't chance. This was a door. One she never expected to open, especially not now. And yet, the timing felt cruel. Because when you're this close to survival, abundance feels dangerous, like touching fire. She thought back to her father, how he'd died young, angry, resentful, carrying wounds from a family that shut him out. He used to tell her stories about the Harrington estate: sprawling gardens, marble hallways, chandeliers that cost more than entire neighborhoods. But each story ended with the same line: "They never wanted us, Maya. Not your mother, not me, not you." And now, decades later, a letter had arrived claiming the opposite, or at least suggesting a truth far more complicated. As she sat in the quiet of the van, Maya felt the weight of generational pain pressing against the possibility of generational healing. Maybe this letter wasn't just about money. Maybe it was about the apology her father never received. Maybe it was about rewriting a family story written in rejection. But she didn't have the luxury of sitting with those thoughts long. Reality demanded louder attention. The kids needed diapers, gas, food, and the inheritance, if it was even real, was 900 miles away. Suddenly, the safety net offered by kind strangers felt even smaller compared to the magnitude of this revelation. She needed a plan. She needed time she didn't have. And she needed answers from a family that had never once spoken her name. As she reread the letter, she noticed the final paragraph. "Ms. Harrington left behind a personal note addressed specifically to you. It will be released upon your arrival." A note from the woman who never reached out. A woman who had everything yet chose silence for decades. Maya didn't know if she wanted forgiveness or explanation, but she knew she wanted that note, needed it, and yet a deeper fear nestled beneath her curiosity. What if the Harringtons didn't want her to claim the inheritance? What if the letter wasn't a gift, but a trigger, something that would ignite a storm she wasn't prepared to face? Wealthy families protect their legacies, sometimes violently, and Maya understood enough about privilege to know that not everyone plays fair. Still, within all the complexity, one truth glowed quietly. This letter could change everything, not just for her, but for her children, for their futures, for generations that came after. She tucked the envelope into her coat pocket, close to her heart, feeling its edges press against her ribs like both a promise and a warning. She didn't know how she would get to New York. She didn't know what would wait for her there. But she did know this: she couldn't ignore a door that many people spend lifetimes wishing existed. As she helped the kids back into the van and buckled Claire into her car seat, she whispered under her breath, "We're going to figure this out." It wasn't confidence. It was determination, the kind built in the trenches of hardship. And as the engine coughed to life, Maya caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. Tired eyes, chapped lips, a woman holding her children together with nothing but willpower. Yet in those eyes, for the first time in weeks, she saw something else. Possibility. A possibility that would soon collide with danger, betrayal, and truths that had been buried for decades. Because when news like this spreads, kindness is not the only thing that follows. Greed follows too. Control, fear, and people willing to cross lines to take what was never theirs. So, as we step into the next chapter, remember this moment, this fragile, hopeful breath before the storm. Good news travels fast, but news about money travels faster, and it travels with teeth. Only 48 hours after Maya opened the letter, the world around her shifted in a way she could feel in her bones. It started with a phone call from an unfamiliar number while she was standing outside a convenience store, waiting for Noah and Lila to finish washing their hands. The voice on the other end was smooth, sharp, and unmistakably rehearsed. "Miss Thompson, my name is Preston Harrington. I understand you've received communication regarding my grandmother's estate." He didn't offer condolences. He didn't ask how she was doing. He didn't acknowledge that she had children or that she was clearly calling from a parking lot with cars whooshing by. He jumped straight into business, straight into control. This inheritance was never intended for someone in your circumstances, he said carefully, as if trying to sound polite while stepping on her dignity. Then came the offer. If you agree to waive your claim, the family is prepared to offer you $3 million, immediate payout, no questions asked. $3 million. For a woman sleeping in a van. For 3 children living on crackers and gas station bananas. It was tempting enough to make the air feel thin, but something about his tone, his certainty that she would accept, that she should accept, made her throat tighten. She asked why the family didn't want her involved. The silence on the line stretched long enough to become its own answer. Then Preston cleared his throat and said, "Let's just say the Harrington name is delicate. We can't risk scandals or complications." Scandals. Complications. That's what they called her. She ended the call with shaking hands and a raw, uneasy feeling growing inside her. Because if someone is willing to offer millions to make you disappear, it means they believe you have the power to take far more from them. And they weren't done. The next day, Maya received an email addressed to Ms. Maya Thompson, a.k.a. Maya Rivera, a.k.a. Maya Harrington. The message accused her of identity fraud and warned that legal action would be taken if she set foot near the Harrington estate. Attached was a 5-page document filled with legal jargon designed to intimidate, to scare, to make her back down before she even understood her rights. It claimed she had no legitimate connection to the Harrington bloodline, no proof of her father's paternity, no stability, no moral standing. They even referenced her eviction, her homelessness, her car, her children, turning her lowest moments into ammunition. This wasn't a disagreement. It was a warning shot. The wolves had arrived, polished and wealthy and relentless. And with them came the oldest truth of all. When there is power to be lost, the powerful will fight dirtier than anyone else. But nothing prepared Maya for what happened next. It was a Saturday afternoon. The kids were playing near the van in a church parking lot, where Pastor Evelyn had offered them a place to rest for a few hours. Maya had stepped inside the side hall to pick up donated diapers. She was gone for less than 7 minutes. When she walked back outside, she saw Lila standing frozen, her eyes wide with fear. "Mom," she whispered, pointing toward the edge of the lot. Noah got in a car. Maya's heart stopped. There, already pulling onto the road, was a dented blue sedan, and inside, in the back seat, she saw Noah's orange jacket. Then she heard his cry. Muffled, small, desperate. She sprinted after the car, screaming his name, but the sedan turned the corner and disappeared. Lila collapsed into sobs. Baby Claire began wailing, and Maya's world fractured in a single instant. All she could hear over her own heartbeat was one thought pounding. Not my child. Please, not my child. The police took 40 minutes to arrive, and when they did, they treated it like a custody dispute, not a kidnapping. "Are you sure it wasn't the father?" one officer asked, clipboard in hand, eyes tired. Maya hadn't seen Jeremy in years, but the moment the officer said his name, something inside her went cold. Jeremy. The man who left when Noah was born. The man who drifted in and out of trouble, addiction, and bad decisions. The man who'd always chased money and blamed Maya for not having enough of it. She didn't want to believe he could sink this low. But desperation changes people. Addiction changes people. Greed changes them even more. Hours later, her phone rang again. This time, there was no smooth voice, no fake politeness, just Jeremy, slurring, angry, panicked. "I heard about your little payday," he said. "You owe me, and I'm taking what's mine unless we make a deal." Maya could barely breathe. "Put Noah on the phone," she demanded. She heard muffled crying. Noah's crying. That was all she needed to hear. Jeremy continued, "You're going to meet me. You're going to hand over a share of that inheritance, or you'll never see him again." Her whole body went numb, but her mind sharpened in a way she'd never felt. Poverty teaches a person how to survive, but motherhood teaches a person how to fight. And right then, Maya made a silent vow she felt burn through her veins. No one, not a rich family, not a lawyer, not a man she once loved, would take her child from her. Not now. Not ever. The next 12 hours were a blur of fear, frantic searching, and begging for help from anyone who would listen. The police were slow. The system was slow. The world was slow. But the danger was fast. Too fast. In those hours, Maya learned another painful truth about America's hidden struggles. Children of homeless parents are statistically more likely to be kidnapped by a non-custodial parent, not because the homeless parent is unfit, but because the other parent assumes they can exploit the lack of stability, lack of witnesses, lack of protection. It happens quietly, constantly, unnoticed. But what the statistics never capture is the fire that ignites in a mother when her child is stolen. Maya felt that fire. It burned away her fear, her exhaustion, her doubts, and it left only one thing behind: resolve. She didn't know exactly how she'd get Noah back. She didn't know how she'd reach New York or face the Harrington Empire. But she knew the wolves were closing in from every direction. Family greed on one side, Jeremy's desperation on the other. And if she didn't act, the ground beneath her would collapse completely. So, she made a choice. A dangerous, necessary choice. She reached out to the one person who'd shown her steady kindness, the one person she knew wasn't afraid of helping people in impossible situations. Pastor Evelyn. And through her, Maya would be connected to someone who could change everything. A young lawyer who understood what it meant to grow up invisible and who fought for people like her because he once was her. There comes a point in every story where fear stops being the loudest voice in the room. For Maya, that moment arrived inside a quiet church office with peeling wallpaper and mismatched chairs, where Pastor Evelyn introduced her to a young attorney named Jordan Reyes. He didn't look like the kind of lawyer the Harringtons would hire. No tailored suit, no polished arrogance. His jacket was frayed at the sleeves. His briefcase carried stickers from public defender conferences, and his eyes had the tired alertness of someone who fought for people who couldn't fight for themselves. He listened, really listened, as Maya told him everything: the letter, the threats, the offer to buy her silence, and finally, through tears, the kidnapping of Noah. Jordan didn't flinch. He didn't question her credibility or ask why she hadn't done things differently. Instead, he leaned back, exhaled slowly, and said, "Okay, then we fight." 3 words. Simple. But for Maya, they unlocked something she hadn't felt in weeks. A sense that she didn't have to navigate this nightmare alone. He laid out a plan. The Harringtons wanted to frame this as fraud. Then they'd counter with evidence, real evidence. They'd gather birth certificates, hospital records, statements from neighbors who knew her father, anything proving her lineage. They'd contact the law firm that sent the inheritance letter to confirm legitimacy and freeze any attempt by the Harringtons to rewrite the narrative. And, most importantly, Jordan would help her file an emergency petition demanding law enforcement escalate Noah's case beyond custody complication. But even with all his determination, Jordan was honest about the battle ahead. They're rich, they're powerful, they will fight dirty, he warned. But courts care about truth, and truth leaves a trail. The first step was finding that trail. Jordan drove Maya and the kids, minus Noah, whose empty booster seat felt like a wound, across the city to gather records from county offices. They waited in lines for hours, shuffled through paperwork, dug through archival boxes that smelled like dust and forgotten stories, and in one of those boxes they found something that took Maya's breath away: a copy of her father's paternity acknowledgement, naming him as Eleanor Harrington's son. Not speculation, not rumor, proof. And suddenly, the stone wall the Harringtons tried to build around their wealth had its first crack. But cracks weren't enough. They needed something irrefutable, something no lawyer could twist. They needed DNA. Jordan arranged for private testing through a contact he trusted, a lab specialist who agreed to expedite results. All they needed was a genetic match from a verified Harrington relative. It seemed impossible until a soft voice from the doorway changed everything. "I think I can help with that," the woman said. She introduced herself as Sylvia Monroe, Eleanor's niece. She'd heard whispers about Maya through a distant cousin and had come to see the truth for herself. Sylvia was gentle but firm, carrying a sadness that seemed older than her. She told Maya stories about Eleanor, stories of guilt, of regret, of a woman who spent her final years trying to undo decades of silence. She admitted that the family had kept secrets, rewritten the past, and buried the existence of Maya's father to protect their reputation. "You were never the mistake," Sylvia whispered. "The mistake was the lie." She agreed to provide a DNA sample on the spot. It was the first real moment Maya felt the universe tilt in her favor. But there was still Noah. Still the frantic agony of not knowing where he was. With Jordan's help, they managed to petition the court to classify the situation as a kidnapping with immediate risk, forcing local police to coordinate with neighboring states. They filed alerts. They traced calls. They checked shelters, clinics, cheap motels, anywhere Jeremy might have taken a scared little boy. Every lead felt like a punch to the lungs when it turned cold. But Maya kept moving, driven by the only truth that mattered. Her son was out there. 3 days later, an officer in Pennsylvania spotted a blue sedan matching the description. They found Jeremy alone, pacing outside a convenience store. Noah was inside the car, asleep but unharmed, clutching his toy fire truck. When the police returned him to Maya, she broke, not with fear or anger, but with a trembling, overwhelming relief that flooded her entire body. She held him so tightly he squeaked, "Mom, I can't breathe." And she laughed through her tears because it was the sweetest sound she'd ever heard. The reunion refueled her spirit. If the Harringtons wanted a battle, she'd give them one. Jordan compiled the documents. The DNA results came back as a 99.8% match. The law firm confirmed the legitimacy of the inheritance and scheduled her in-person appointment for the upcoming Monday. Maya had 12 days left to reach New York. 12 days to confront the family who'd erased her. 12 days to finish a fight she never asked for, but was now determined to win. Jordan offered to drive her as far as he could before returning to other clients. They packed what little they had back into the van, this time not with desperation, but with purpose. Every mile toward New York felt like a mile toward reclaiming something bigger than wealth: identity, belonging, justice. Along the road, as the children slept in the back and streetlights flickered across the windshield, Maya allowed herself to breathe for the first time in weeks. The hum of the highway felt steady, almost comforting. And in that quiet, she learned a lesson she carried with her long after her battle ended. Strength isn't something you find when life is easy. It's something you discover when life takes everything from you and you're still willing to fight. With New York's skyline still hundreds of miles away, Maya felt the weight of the past and the pull of the future pressing against her chest. She didn't know what awaited her at the law firm. She didn't know how the Harringtons would react when she walked through their doors with DNA in one hand and courage in the other. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she was done running. There's a certain kind of intimidation that only old money can create, the kind that doesn't raise its voice because it never had to. Maya felt that weight the moment she stepped into the marble lobby of Morton and Callahan. The building itself felt like a declaration, ceilings high enough to swallow sound, chandeliers like frozen lightning, walls lined with oil portraits of men who died believing their names would last forever. She held Noah's hand in one palm, Lila's in the other, and tucked baby Claire against her hip. Each child looked around with wide eyes, absorbing a world designed for people who never had to worry about rent or hunger or eviction notices taped to their doors. The receptionist, polished and robotic, asked for Maya's name with a tone that suggested she didn't expect her to be on the appointment list. But when she checked the screen, her face changed, not with warmth, just recognition. "Ms. Thompson, they're expecting you. Conference room 5. That was all she said. No smile, no welcome, just a door opening into a battlefield. When Maya entered the conference room, 3 people were already waiting. Preston Harrington, immaculate as ever, in a suit that probably cost more than she'd earned in a year. Beside him sat Margot Harrington, his mother, her pearls gleaming like symbols of inherited power. And, at the far end, separated from them by an emotional ocean, sat Sylvia Monroe, the only Harrington who had chosen truth over silence. She offered Maya a small smile, one that carried encouragement, sorrow, and apology all at once. The lawyers began with formalities, shuffling papers, confirming identities. Then Preston leaned forward, tapping the polished table. "Ms. Thompson, we appreciate you coming. It's unfortunate this situation has escalated so far." Escalated. As if she had caused the chaos, as if she had asked to be dragged into their world. He tried again to negotiate, this time more forcefully. "Walk away," he said. "Take the $3 million. This inheritance was intended for the family, not for outsiders." His pause was deliberate, slicing her humanity with a single word: outsider. But Maya didn't shrink, not today. Not after everything she had survived. She placed the DNA report on the table, 99.8% match. Indisputable. Unshakable. "Your grandmother chose me," Maya said quietly. "Your opinion of me doesn't change that." Margot scoffed, crossing her arms. "Eleanor made a mistake. You don't understand the legacy at stake." But Sylvia's voice cut through the room like a blade of light. "The mistake," she said, "was pretending Maya didn't exist. Pretending her father didn't exist. Hiding the truth for the sake of an image." Her words didn't waver. "It's time to stop rewriting history." The tension in the room thickened until it felt hard to breathe. Preston's composure cracked. "Do you have any idea what this will do to the family?" he snapped. And for the first time in this entire journey, Maya didn't feel small. She didn't feel unworthy. She didn't feel like the girl who packed her life into plastic bags. She felt like a woman standing in the wreckage of a lineage that had tried to erase her, and still rising. "I know exactly what this will do," she said. "It will reveal the truth. And the truth doesn't need permission." Jordan, steady beside her, slid forward a second folder. Legal documentation, proving the legitimacy of the trust letter. Then a third, statements from neighbors, records from the hospital where her father had been born, even a handwritten note from an old family friend who remembered Eleanor's fury when her son chose love over wealth. Piece by piece, the Harrington dynasty's carefully crafted facade began to crack. Margot stood suddenly. "We will contest this," she declared. "This family will not be humiliated." But the lead attorney, a man with silver hair and the weary patience of someone who had served too many generations of powerful people, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Harrington, the trust is airtight. If we challenge this, we risk exposing decades of internal misconduct. The board won't support it." That was when the final blow fell, not from Maya, not from Jordan, but from the past itself. The attorney opened a sealed envelope. "This is the personal note Ms. Harrington left for Maya." Maya's hands shook as she broke the seal. Eleanor's handwriting was elegant but fragile, like it had been written with trembling regret. "To the granddaughter I never met, I failed you before you were born. I failed your father before he became a man. Wealth made me blind when I should have been brave. This inheritance is not a gift, it is restitution. Build a life your father was never allowed to live, and forgive me if forgiveness is a kindness you can spare." Maya couldn't stop the tears, not because of the money, not because of the apology, but because someone, somewhere in her bloodline, had finally said her name with love. Preston looked defeated. Margot looked furious. Sylvia looked relieved. And Maya, she looked whole. Not wealthy, not victorious, just whole. The lawyers confirmed what everyone already knew. The trust belonged to her, legally, irrevocably, entirely. But beneath the legal triumph came a deeper lesson, one Maya felt settle into her bones. Some dynasties are built on silence, but they crumble the moment someone chooses truth. When she left the building, stepping out into the cold New York air, the city didn't pause. Cars still honked. Strangers still hurried past. But inside her, something monumental had shifted. She didn't feel like the woman who'd slept in a van. She didn't feel like the woman who'd been offered hush money, threatened, or chased. She felt like someone who had reclaimed the chapters stolen from her family's story. And as she held her children close, guiding them toward the street where the old caravan was parked, she knew the confrontation was only one part of the journey. Because inheritances don't just change bank accounts, they change responsibilities, identities, futures. Wealth doesn't transform a life in a single day. It doesn't wipe away the memories of cold nights in a van or the taste of fear when a child goes missing. What it does, if used with intention, is create space to breathe, to dream, to rebuild. In the weeks that followed the confrontation with the Harrington dynasty, Maya found herself in a strange transition, moving between two worlds, the world she had survived and the world she now had the power to change. Her bank account, once a battlefield of overdraft fees and last-minute scrambles, now held more zeros than she'd ever imagined. But with that abundance came a question she couldn't ignore. What now? The answer revealed itself slowly, not in luxurious purchases or lavish living, but in moments that tugged at her memory. Like when she drove past a grocery store parking lot and saw a mother rocking a crying toddler in the back seat of a dusty sedan. Or when Lila asked quietly if other kids still had to sleep in cars like we used to. Or when she couldn't pass a library without remembering the warmth of Evelyn's tea or the kindness of strangers who'd given her family space to survive. Each small reminder felt like a note from the universe saying, "You got out. Now help someone else out too." So she began with conversations. She met with social workers, housing advocates, church leaders, and former shelter residents. She sat in community centers and listened to families who were still trapped in the very reality she had clawed her way out of. She heard stories about wait lists that stretched for months, shelters that turned families away after dark, children who hid their living situations out of shame, and parents who juggled two jobs and still couldn't afford rent. It wasn't just homelessness. It was a system failing in slow motion, and she knew she couldn't fix everything. But she also knew she didn't need to fix everything to make a difference. She just had to begin. With guidance from experts who believed in her vision, Maya launched the Horizon Haven Foundation, a non-profit built not from pity but from lived experience. She designed it the way she had wished the world worked during the darkest chapters of her life. Practical, compassionate, dignifying. The foundation offered a 3-step model: emergency housing for families in crisis, transitional units that allowed parents to stay with their children without judgment or time limits, and long-term mentorship in financial literacy, employment pathways, child care support, and trauma healing. She bought an abandoned shopping center on the outskirts of the city and turned it into a community campus with bright murals, a communal kitchen, a children's play area, and rooms that felt like home, not holding cells for the poor. And she didn't do it alone. She hired Evelyn, the librarian, who had given her tea and dignity when she had nothing, to run the learning center, she brought in Miguel from the gas station to lead operations and maintenance, telling him she remembered every ounce of compassion in the sandwich he once pretended was left behind. She offered Calvin, the security guard, who quietly protected her family on cold nights, a role overseeing on-site safety. And for the first time in years, he walked with a renewed sense of purpose. Jordan helped establish the legal clinic inside the center, offering pro bono support to families entangled in eviction filings or custody battles. And Sylvia, not as a Harrington, but as a woman seeking redemption, funded the mental health wing in honor of her Aunt Eleanor. As the foundation opened its doors, families began arriving, some shaken, some skeptical, all exhausted. Maya recognized the expressions instantly, the guarded eyes, the forced strength, the fear of hoping again. She welcomed every single one with the words she once needed to hear, "You're safe now. We will figure this out together." She offered warm meals, clean rooms, childcare during job interviews, and classes where parents relearned how to dream without guilt. She watched children go from silent and withdrawn to laughing in the courtyard. She watched parents lift their heads a little higher each day. And she watched the cycle of homelessness break, not through charity, but through empowerment. The lesson was powerful and clear. When someone who has survived the fall builds the bridge actually holds. People trusted her foundation because they trusted her story. They trusted that she understood the difference between charity and dignity. And she did. She understood it deeply. But as fulfilling as the work was, Maya knew her journey wasn't finished. Wealth had given her tools. Experience had given her purpose. But legacy, the kind that outlives you, comes from what you choose to build next. And what she was building was bigger than a refuge. It was a promise. A promise that no mother would have to sit in a freezing car wondering if tomorrow would be worse. A promise that children would not learn fear before they learned stability. A promise that survival could be the beginning of something extraordinary, not the end of hope. Healing doesn't arrive with fanfare. It doesn't sweep in like a miracle or feel like a sudden breath of air after drowning. It comes quietly, like the first hint of sunrise after a long night, soft and unassuming, arriving before you even realize the darkness is lifting. For Maya, healing began in the simplest moments. Brushing Claire's hair before preschool, packing lunches without counting every slice of bread, watching Noah run across the backyard of their modest new home without fear of neighbors complaining, hearing Lila laugh freely in a way she hadn't laughed since before the van. These small things, ordinary things, became the markers of a life reclaimed. And though she now had the resources to live extravagantly, she chose something different. A warm two-bedroom house tucked in a quiet neighborhood where the windows filled with morning light and the days felt grounded, real, hers. It wasn't the house that made her feel whole. It was the rhythm, the morning ritual of pancakes on Saturdays, the sound of children arguing over crayons, the smell of coffee drifting through the kitchen. Life slowed down enough for her to be present, to breathe, to notice the world around her without survival pressing in on every thought. She spent her evenings journaling, processing the trauma she had carried for so long, and attending support groups for parents who had endured homelessness. She had found community, not by necessity, but by choice. People who understood the invisible scars she still carried, even now, And as she listened to their stories, she learned something humbling. Healing is not a destination, but a practice, a commitment to giving yourself the gentleness you once denied. Still, there was one place she had avoided, one chapter she hadn't closed. The old parking lot behind the convenience store where she and her children spent their first night in the van. Weeks turned into months, and though she worked tirelessly at the Horizon Haven Foundation, supporting families, celebrating milestones, rewriting futures, Maya knew there was a part of her story she still hadn't confronted. So, one quiet morning before the sun had fully risen, she drove there alone. No children, no lawyers, no entourage, just her. The lot hadn't changed. The cracked pavement, the crooked lamppost, the faded lines on the ground. It was all the same, except she wasn't. She stepped out of the car and stood exactly where the van once parked, closing her eyes as the memories washed over her, the cold air, the fear in her chest, the whispered promises she'd made to herself in the dark. She remembered watching her children sleep, wondering if anyone in the world knew how close she was to breaking. And now, standing in that same spot, she let herself cry, not with sadness, but with gratitude for the strength she never knew she had. From her coat pocket, Maya pulled out a folded piece of paper, a letter she had written earlier that morning. She placed it gently on the ground, where the van once stood, weighing it down with a small stone. It wasn't meant for her. It wasn't meant for anyone she knew. It was for whoever might find themselves there next, sitting in a car that felt too small for their pain. The letter said, "If you are here because life has pushed you to the edge, please listen. You are not broken. You are not invisible. You are standing at the beginning, not the end. Sunrise is closer than you think." She stepped back, wiping her tears with the back of her hand, knowing that words don't change the world, but they can carry someone through the night until they find their own strength again. And that mattered. That mattered more than the inheritance, more than the victory over the Harrington name, more than the headlines that briefly mentioned her story. As Maya walked to her car, the first streak of sunrise painted the sky in soft gold, a quiet reminder that beginnings often look like endings until the light touches them. She took a deep breath and felt something settle inside her, a peace that came not from wealth, but from purpose, from knowing she had taken the worst parts of her life and turned them into something that could shelter others. The cycle that once trapped her family had been broken, and now she was part of a different kind of inheritance, one built not on money, but on compassion, resilience, and hope. And just before she drove away, she looked once more at the letter on the pavement and whispered, "For anyone who needs it, may this be your sunrise too. If this touched you, share it. If you learned something, comment it. If you want more, subscribe. Your voice helps this story find another heart."